So let's talk about the Alaia Fall Winter 24 collection. As you guys know, the current creative director at Alaia is Pieter Mulier. He has been the creative director for a while now. As you guys know, timeline-wise, unfortunately, Azzedine Alaia himself passed away in 2017. And essentially, the Alaia team were designing collections until it was announced that Pieter Mulier would be his successor. Now, it's very interesting because Pieter Mulier was someone that was Russ Simmons' right-hand man for a really long time. I really liked what they did when they were at Calvin Klein. I've made a whole video on my channel about Russ Simmons' time at Calvin Klein. And it's kind of interesting. They have a funny name for it. It's called Summer Fall. I've never seen any brand apart from Alaia sort of name their collections like that. I think it's because their collections are quite infrequent. So they're essentially just saying it's not summer, it's not fall, it can be summer or fall. So to essentially read the show notes and what they're saying this show is about, it says, the Summer Fall 2024 collection is about simplicity and purity. It's about intimacy, about reducing to an essence, about finding a freedom and invention in that. It is a decision, a choice, not to minimize, but to focus, to expand possibilities. The entire collection is created using a single merino wool yarn, reinvented over and over again with the Maison's textile and knitwear suppliers who have worked with Alaia for 4 decades. It is based on the curve, on the circle, the curves of women and circles of friends, of chosen family, an idea essential to the essence of Alaia. Then this is a quote from Pieter Mulier himself. It says, for this show, I wanted to bring us all together, to view everything up close, close together, close to the clothes. The space integrates the collection with design objects because that fusion is at the very heart of the house's identity. The lights are Pelotta, created by Mark Newson. The sofas are named Molio by Felipe Maluin. I always wanted Alaia to be about more than the clothes because it is about more than the clothes. It's about life, about being together. Now that's kind of interesting because they talked about the furniture, and if you guys can see from the setting of how the sofas are made and the way that the people that were viewing the show were sitting, they're quite close together. So that falls into the theme of them saying, you know, Peter saying he wants to bring everyone together through this show. And just in general, the show is looking at togetherness. The most interesting part that everyone is talking about with this show is, of course, the fact that every single look in this collection was made using a single merino wool yarn. That is so interesting. And the things look so entirely different. I really want to know what techniques were used, you know, to make some of these pieces because they just look so crazy. So now we're going to watch the runway show and really see some of these pieces that were all merino wool made. Also, I think this idea of, you know, Pieter Mulier focusing on one fabric and looking at merino wool is very interesting because that's a very Alaia thing to do. In some of Alaia's early collections, he focused on using leather. And it was this very interesting thing because he was manipulating leather in so many different ways and creating silhouettes that people hadn't really seen used with leather, creating like these interesting leather dresses. And if you guys want to learn more about Alaia's work, something that I can recommend is quite recently when I went to Paris, I went to the Azzedine Alaia Foundation, and there's this amazing Rizzoli book on Alaia's work, and it covers basically the whole history of Alaia from when he was a kid to everything he did in Paris and so on, like even his encounter with Schiaparelli and all the other things. So very, very interesting book, and it's something that I'd recommend for everyone to read. Pieter Mulier was looking at different parts of Alaia's archive because there are some very specific things that I know he likes about Alaia. When you listen to his interviews, he's always talking about, you know, loving Alaia's knitwear, which of course is the major focus in this collection, and something that he wanted to focus on this collection. But he also talks about the white poplin shirt, and he's always looking for ways to, you know, change it every season and manipulate it to make it fresh and make it modern, and finding different ways to modernize it. So it's very interesting that in this collection entirely, I don't even think we saw that. I mean, it'll be very difficult to, as much manipulation that went into this show, it'll be very difficult to have your quintessential white poplin shirt with merino wool. So that's really interesting to see him visiting different aspects of Azzedine Alaia's ideas. And he even said that, I think, in an interview with Vogue, he said that a lot of his past work with Alaia has been a bit in your face. So to quote him directly, he says, "It's moving on. I mean, we did va-va-voom for 2.5 years, and I still love it, but it's not the moment where the world is now. It's, how can you say it properly? It's less sexualized, but still sensual." So it's almost him looking at this idea of Alaia from a less sort of, we are trying to introduce this brand to a TikTok generation lens. Also, Alaia loved women and made clothes for them to have real lives. And these are great of the IG moment, but not true to the house. Yeah, I guess that is true in the sense of, let's say a lot of pieces in this collection aren't everyday clothes, but also not everything Azzedine Alaia made was an everyday piece. Of course, everything he said, what's that famous quote from Azzedine Alaia? I can't remember it, but it's along the lines of, you know, I make clothes to make women feel great about themselves, or something along those lines, right? So that was his MO. It was about making women be like, feel empowered in his clothes. Alaia is owned by Richemont, as far as I can remember. Yeah, exactly. Leo said Richemont owns Alaia. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Kering and LVMH don't own every brand, luckily. Because I even remember when Pieter Mulier was giving interviews when he first became the creative director of Alai. I remember in one of his interviews, he said when he was auditioning for the job, he told the executives from Alaia that he had no intentions to make, like, you know, puffer jackets and sweatshirts and all that sort of stuff. And his vision of Alaia will have a very clear commitment to the craft, which is very interesting. I want to see how long that sticks, because a lot of times designers go to brands with the best of intentions, and then when the going gets tough, all of that goes out the window, doesn't it? So we'll see how long that lasts. One thing I always look for is the shoes. The crocodile tail is there. Yeah, and Alaia was also known for using very exotic leathers like crocodile leather. Obviously, that's a bit controversial in the current fashion landscape to use those kind of exotic fabrics. But yeah, that's something he's definitely known for. Another theme that quite interested me in the show is this idea of him saying that, you know, some of the looks, the women were covered up, but it's still sort of this elegant, sensual thing going on. And it almost reminded me of Simone Rocha, because every time I talk about Simone Rocha, I talk about the fact that she has this idea of playing with what you see and what you don't see on a woman's body. And so that's why Simone Rocha will have a look where it's like a very long line dress all the way to the ankles, but then she plays with the opacity of the actual fabrics themselves. So she'll use fabrics like tulle on some parts so that you can see maybe the arms, because the arms are made of tulle, and then the chest part of the garment will be a bit more blocky so you can't see through it. It's very interesting, like using fabric to manipulate what people can see on the body. I think one must always temper a creative imagination with commerce and pragmatism. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm definitely always the one that always brings all the conversations in fashion back when we start going too far about fashion being an art. And I'm like, let's not forget, these are fashion brands that have, you know, crazy financial targets. And even if, like I was saying earlier, designers go to these brands with the best of intentions, you know, you can't really fight it. The fact that you're ultimately working for a financial corporation that sells clothes. It's also very different to, you know, what we associate with Alaia, because I think what people associate with Alaia is, yes, this sort of sculptural, architectural way of designing, but that is not the only way that Alaia designed. But I guess that's kind of what we associate with Alaia's work. And here we're getting a bit less architectural, sculptural vibes, especially in some of the skirts. And it's a bit of a balance of the architecture, yes, but also sort of free-flowing garments. Is it just me, or do these seem kind of like the Phoebe Philo drop with less excitement. No, I mean, I prefer this to Phoebe Philo because I feel like these garments are a bit more interesting than what Phoebe Philo makes. Not to say that like Phoebe Philo stuff isn't like great or whatever. I just prefer the shapes and silhouettes of, you know, modern Alaia to what Phoebe Philo does. I just find it more interesting. Like even here, if you look at like all these different pleats that they've made with the merino wool, it's just more interesting than what I saw from Phoebe Philo's drop. See what Leo says. Too many designers today think that high fashion equals cumbersome and sculptural showpieces. Yeah, I think because we associate high fashion with really complicated fashion design techniques. And I guess for a lot of people, a good representation of those complicated techniques is to see a garment that's, you know, has all these crazy things going on. But actually, the height of fashion is just really people that are super, super skilled, that things fit exceptionally on the body. That's what is a lot harder to do, because as a designer or as a tailor, you have to keep working and keep working and keep working till you just master different body types and different body shapes. Especially if you're making ready to wear, it's even more difficult because you're trying to find a shape with your garments that kind of works for everyone, which obviously is impossible, but you're trying to get as close to that as possible, which is really hard. I think, yeah, this idea that high fashion, whatever that means, I get confused with what high fashion means these days, but you know, this assumption that high fashion has to be something that is super cumbersome and super complicated is, yeah, it doesn't have to be that. He said it's a white man's unseasoned chicken dish. Alaia made sexy clothes but effortless, and technically he is a master like Chris Balenciaga. Yeah, I mean, Alaia is definitely someone that is considered, you know, one of the greatest couturiers, especially in the 20th century. Like alongside the Balenciagas. It's also kind of strange that they were kind of like reducing what Alaia was doing early in his career. Like, if you guys know about the history, when they were sort of referring to him as like a dressmaker or, you know, a seamstress, and he almost had to fight his way into being respected as a couturier. Very, very interesting. Even the fact, what's that story about Alaia? Didn't he wanted to move to Paris because he wanted to work for Dior? And then I think he was at Dior for only a few days because he didn't have the right papers, or he didn't have the right to work in Paris, which like obviously like made him so distraught. And he used that as motivation to just become like the best designer ever, which obviously worked. And then he eventually was given like the right to stay and like the right to work because he was seen as like a big asset to French fashion. It's really beautiful that in France, they value couture and fashion so highly that if you're a really skilled designer, you literally get like a right to work. That's insane. I don't know how many countries that would happen. Like in how many countries that would happen. See what Cam says. Similarly, many young designers think that making a few tailored coats and jackets in muted colors makes their design language seem more mature. I also think too many people are influenced by designers like McQueen and Galliano, who are / were geniuses, but that brand of dressmaking can't be perfected by everyone. Only a tiny minority can. Yeah, I totally agree, especially if we think of the landscape of fashion right now. Like, you just cannot compare yourself to Galliano and McQueen. It's just not going to happen. McQueen is a Savile Row, like, trained designer. Like, he's someone that worked at Savile Row, mastered his skills, went to Italy, continued honing his skills, came back to London. Like, you just... How many designers these days are that skilled? Not many. John Galliano is the same person that basically drowned himself in, you know, just art and art history and all this sort of stuff. I think I was talking about this in when I was talking about Judith Watt in the last live stream. I think that school of thought is very hard to come by. It's so hard to come by. Like every time, because I talk to so many designers, not even just, you know, people from my audience that might be more into fashion. I might just go to like a random place in London and I meet some people and then they find out I'm a fashion journalist and then maybe someone has a brand and they're like, oh, what do you think of my brand? Or they're trying to talk to me about fashion. And you just find that most people that have brands or design clothes, they're not coming from that school of thought. Their goal is not to become the best designer they can possibly be. They're maybe into fashion because it's cool. Maybe, you know, then they can see that it's very profitable, so they want to make a lot of money. They're not coming from it from the perspective of like someone like an Azzedine Alaia who's like, I want to be the cream of the crop dressmaker. I want to be better than everyone else. They're not coming at it. I feel like a lot of kids or people that have brands these days are not coming from it from that perspective. So even when you look at McQueen's clothes on face value, you're missing all the context because McQueen is someone that used to go to the V&A all the time and he's very inspired by, you know, a lot of history and historical figures, and that's where he gets his references from. And he's also referencing silhouettes from like the 18th century, the 17th century, and bringing that back, modernizing it, and also having this Savile Row skill. All of that is just lost in translation when people just look at, you know, Galliano's clothes or McQueen's clothes and then try to like be inspired by it. And that's why normally things that are derivative of, you know, McQueen's work or Galliano's work, it always falls flat. It just always falls flat. What did Leah? I think the only designers today who can compete with them are Yoji, Ray, and possibly Olivier Thijsken. I thought Olivier was actually going to go to Art Milamista, by the way, when what's his name went there? Ludovic de Saint-Sanan. I thought Olivier was actually going to go there. But no, I think there's many other designers that can compete. I do rate Rick Owens very, very highly. I'm trying to think of what designers. I think J.W. Anderson is, I think maybe because we're living in the moment and he's still low-key kind of contemporary, I think we might underestimate J.W. Anderson. I think J.W. Anderson is an extremely good designer, like really, really skilled. I think J.W. Anderson is an example of one of those designers that comes from that school of thought that I'm talking about, that a lot of designers are, especially these days, are lacking. I've seen people compare Dilara Findikoglu and McQueen thoughts. I think they probably compare them because of like a lot of McQueen's work had themes of like pain and anger, and Dilara's work has a lot of those kind of themes, even though they're coming from different places. And I think on face value, it definitely does look like Dilara's inspired by McQueen a lot in like the way she designs clothes. So I can see the comparisons, but yeah, I can see it. There's no excuse to do half-assed work with all the resources people have to learn how to design and make clothes. Why we keep making it okay to expect less from creative directors. I know, right? And this is why I get so much hate on YouTube, because when I say that, you know, some of these really big brands have so much at their disposal and they still can't create cohesive collections, it's actually quite shocking. As someone that literally did a whole degree in fashion journalism, and I had to learn about fashion history from the 17th century till now, and I've seen so many clothes over the years, and it's like, why are couturiers that had way less resources than you making way more interesting clothes? Like, that should not be a thing. Things are supposed to evolve. Like, everything else evolves. Technology evolves. You know, sport evolves. People get better in every sport as the years go on, because, like, you know, biochemistry and just everything around it evolves. So it's always shocked me, like even down to fashion being, you know, bad quality and the quality going down gradually. It really shocked me because it's like, why aren't things evolving? Like, things should be getting better, not worse. And something I will say about this Alai collection is the reason why a lot of these designers that I do like are making really interesting collections is, apart from the fact they're just good designers, is also they have a lot of time to actually work on these things. So I think Pieter Mulier was saying that he worked on the merino wool pieces for a year, which I was so happy about because I always talk about how fashion is too fast. We need to slow down. Everything just moves a bit too quickly for my liking. So I love that he was able to take the time and really manipulate merino wool in many different ways because he actually had the time to. Alaia is beautiful, but the spirit of Azzedine is a bit lost. A lot of experimentation, and the woman's body is lost. Yeah, I need to I want to see if they have a video on the Instagram page of how they made some of those pieces out of the wool. Let me see if I can find some of the pieces, because this is one of the pieces that everyone was talking about, because this piece is actually 3D printed out of merino wool, as far as I can understand. And that's how it's able to hold this structure and hold this shape. But I want to know if it's only wool, because if it's only wool, for it to hold this structure, I really want to know and feel it and see how exactly they made that. Because wool is never really stiff like that. Alaia was dubbed the king of cling, and so far I'm not seeing the cling. Yeah. Yeah, I see that. I like looking at designers I don't like because it's interesting. Ellie Saab is as valid as Ray Kawakubo. So the thing is, like, so once again, I don't like or dislike any designer. I don't like these. I'm not friends with any of these designers, and I don't have any reason to hate any designer either. So when I'm covering their shows, it's really objective, and I don't constantly hate on designers for the sake of hating on them. So, for example, someone like Demna, I'm not the biggest fan of his recent work, but I don't dislike Demna. I like a lot of his earlier work. I just think now, like I said in that video that I posted, I think he's, kind of run out of ideas, or his ideas haven't developed in any way. So he's just basically saying the same thing over and over again through his clothes, and through like the narrative that he's pushing in Balenciaga. But that doesn't mean I necessarily dislike Demna. And the second that I think he does something different, I'll be the first person to say it. So it's not like I like or dislike anyone. Even, Maria Grazia Chiuri, who everyone hates on, I have reasons why I don't like her work, but it's not like I hate her. And some of her recent collections, I have liked them. It's just, I can talk about that in a different video, but there's just many, many, many reasons why I don't like her work. But the second that all those reasons change, or she doesn't do what I dislike about her work, I'll be the first person to say, oh, this is really interesting. So it's not necessarily from a perspective of, I just don't like that designer's work. I don't think there's any designer that inherently I just don't like, because designers do different things. So it just depends. Demna stands are going to be on your ass later. Be careful. They're always on my ass. I get comments every day from that Balenciaga video I made of people just being like, who the hell do you think you are? What do you know about fashion? I had someone who, I don't know if he was like projecting. I don't know what it was. It was so strange. But the comment was along the lines of, I don't care if you study fashion journalism at CSM. I don't care if you're a journalist. I don't even care if you've written for Vogue. You don't know what you're talking about. I don't agree with anything you say. And it's like, God damn. Like, what did I do to you? The personal attacks are crazy. Maria gets way too much hate. She's a skilled and competent dressmaker / tailor. She's just not very imaginative, but nobody is expecting her to be. Yeah, I agree. I just think that, because with Maria, first of all, I think that she's commodifying feminism, and her vision of what feminism is, I don't agree with it. So that's also another thing. And because every single show it's about some feminist artist, or, feminist works that are very, very white and very, very European and very, very stale. Her reference points tend to be very stale. So in terms of like the clothes themselves, the clothes are actually quite nice, which everyone says they're not, but I don't necessarily agree with that. I just think that how she comes to the clothes, because I think so many brands make nice clothes, but it's like, how do you differentiate yourself? And I always hold creative directors of the biggest brands to the highest standard because you have millions and millions at your disposal to make this collection. So I expect the best of the best. And with Maria, we get nice clothes, but that's all we get. I think people just can't get over the Galliano years. Yeah, that people will forever just talk about Galliano's Dior, which was amazing. But we just have to move on. Like, we have to move on. There have been many designers since. We have to move on all different sides, whether we're talking about Ras Simmons or, you know, like Chris Van Ash, Adi Slimane, like the list goes on, Maria Grazia-Chiuri, Kim Jones, blah, blah, blah. I want to see the spiral dresses being put on. In my head, it's like the most luxurious snap bracelet. I like that. I like that take, actually. I really like that. But yeah, shout out to Pieter Mulier with this collection. I'm going to get some of the detailed shots on Vogue Runway because I just want to have a look at how these things actually look up close. We've also got some other Alaia references. Like people said, the body hugging silhouettes aren't necessarily there, which is interesting. You have this like fur looking piece, but it's actually merino wool. I always make fun of that thing, like, oh, you think it's denim, but no, it's actually merino wool. Oh, you think this is... It's interesting, though. It is interesting. The fabric manipulation, I think, is a very Alaia thing. The polka dots is very Alaia. I feel like when we compare designers to their namesake or others that have been at the house, they will always be set up to fail and never compare. In a way, yes. But if you're a good designer, I think that it doesn't matter, because I think we all understand that, you know, Christian Dior is a very influential designer, but then the designers that came after, you know, the likes of Yves Saint Laurent or Gianfranco and so on, no one says that they were living in Christian Dior's shadow. If anything, Yves Saint Laurent especially was touted as, you know, the next big thing after Dior. In fact, when the house was still open before Dior passed, Yves Saint Laurent started designing a lot of the collections anyway. So in the press, there was this understanding that, you know, Yves Saint Laurent is like super skilled on the level of like a Christian Dior anyway. So I don't think, if you're that good of a designer, I don't think it matters. The only issue is that, once again, like I said earlier, most designers these days, they just don't come from that school of thought that some of the like greatest designers we talk about come from. A lot of them, I don't know what their motives are for being into, maybe like they just want to be designers because they like designing fashion, which is cool, but I don't get the sense that they want to be the best of the best. Like, if you look in the 20th century, so many of the designers were so exceptional because they genuinely wanted to be the top dog. Like, even down to, on Patreon, I talk about like costume designers a lot. So someone I talk about, and I've talked about in the past, is someone like Adrian, who, for you guys that don't know, is a very, very famous and influential costume designer, like Hollywood costume designer, made some of the most important dresses in some of the most famous Hollywood films. And he was an insanely good dressmaker, like insanely good. But once again, I digress. It's just annoying sometimes because it comes across like I'm hating or I'm a hater when I say, oh, this designer, I don't know why, like, their work is really uninspired. And then people are like, oh my God, you're hating. It's like, no, like, trust me. If I start talking about designers who had less resources and what they were making in the 40s, you'd see why I'm saying that. If someone buys these clothes, I wonder how in the world will they wash them and use them again? I guess this is for a particular client. I'd love to see Alaia in the streets. Yeah, you're definitely not. You'd have to take it to a dry cleaner, and probably not just any dry cleaner. It'd have to be some like specialist dry cleaner that works with. There are these kind of people, like in London, for example, I know certain shoemakers that deal with really expensive shoes because they know how to work with like really expensive shoes and in ways that it won't be damaged. Whereas if you just take it to like a normal person, they might mess up your shoes. The same is the case with dry cleaners. There are dry cleaners that specialize in like clothes that are made in complicated ways with complicated, unusual fabrics. So you just have a very, very high dry cleaning bill, which for rich people, I don't think they care. That is not a very big expense for the kind of person that would buy that kind of dress. If they can even walk in these clothes to even wear them. Exactly. When you have money for high fashion, you have money for dry cleaning, and usually brands have their network of dry cleaners. You say that, but I technically have money for high fashion because I save up and buy like one piece a year. So I guess I have money for high fashion, but I definitely don't have money for like crazy expensive dry cleaning bills. But then I don't buy the kind of clothes that would need that, to be fair. What does you say? Not everyone is going to be a Galliano, McQueen, or Lagerfeld, and that is okay. I feel like those who don't reach that level don't have enough room. Yeah, I mean, when Galliano, McQueen, and Lagerfeld were designing, there were also mid-level brands. There were designers doing loads of things all at the same time. It's just that sometimes, especially now, certain designers are lauded for being like super, super exceptional, and what they're designing is literally oversized hoodies. It's a bit insane. There are too many not like them at that level today. That's the problem. Yeah, like I said, I can say that Rick Owens is definitely on that level. I can say that, to be honest, the most interesting and skilled designers, they're just not coming from the West. Like when I think of designers that really interest me, in terms of designers that are doing really, 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 really revolutionary, interesting things, a lot of them are like Japanese and Chinese or like African. So I'm thinking of designers like Tebe Mugugu. I'm thinking of designers like Murinaga. That's the guy that runs Anirillage. Or I'm thinking of designers like Kei Ninomiya or Ziggy Chen or Uma Wang. Those are, but because we don't think of these brands when we think of like Fashion Week and brands that are always at Fashion Week and stuff, even though they do show at Paris Fashion Week, some of them. I'm trying to think what other, Rick Owens is definitely at that level, 100%. JW Anderson, I would put on that level. Who else is a designer in a modern era that can hang with the McQueens and Gallianos? I think Demna can hang with those designers skill-wise. I just think what he's doing now would refrain me from putting him there. But I think from a perspective of what he can actually do, I think he's definitely there. This YouTube channel runs on your support. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon. You'll gain access to exclusive content that includes everything from my Patreon podcast, where I give a behind-the-scenes insight into the fashion industry, as well as a fashion book club, where I review my favorite fashion books. You can also check out my fashion ebook, which highlights the best fashion journalists to follow, definitions of common fashion terminology, and how to determine what a good source of fashion information is. The links to everything are in the description below.